Welcome to the Cowboy Up Podcast, where talk is all about the West. This episode is brought to you by White Stallion Ranch and produced by Cowboy Spirit USA. Mark Sublette, owner of Medicine Man Gallery and host of the Art Dealer Diaries Podcast, joins Russell and Allen to talk about Southwestern art, including paintings by the acclaimed Maynard Dixon, one of the most revered artists of the West. So, let's get on over to the ranch.
You know, Alan, it's kind of funny. I've been kind of on a binge of buying old Dude Ranch books lately, and of course, everybody in Colorado, Wyoming, Montana thinks that's where the real Dude Ranches are. And 3 out of the 4 books I got had saguaros in them. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to show that to those northern boys. It is the iconic symbol of the Southwest, even though it's just in Arizona.
And just a small part of Arizona as well.
Yeah.
But, I take comfort in the saguaros I have. And I even have an art piece that's a full-size saguaro, but it's made out of metal, and it's right alongside a growing saguaro at my house, and I look at that and chuckle.
Well, that's for sure. Well, of course, saguaros are in Mexico too, and our whole area is a variety, hosts a variety of cultures: Native American, Mexican, cowboy culture, mining, farming, the whole thing. I think the art in your house is kind of reflective of that.
Well, I don't have a fancy art gallery in my house, but yes, the art in the house is of a lot of things, and I have a little collection of Mata Ortiz pottery, which I've enjoyed going to Mata Ortiz and buying, and when I was there one time, got acquainted with Juan Quesada, who's the father of Mata Ortiz art, and happened to mention that we're both ranchers, and that just lit his fire. So he took me out to his ranch, and I spent all day with him, going all around his ranch with him, and but I enjoy that kind of stuff. So, and we've got an artist with us today, and art seller, so I'm anxious to get to that. Mark, are you on the line?
I am here.
Well, I'm going to do a little intro. Mark Sublette is the owner of the Medicine Man Gallery, which is, famous and well known around the entire region, probably the world, but it's here in Tucson. Mark started out as a physician. Now he's an authority on Native American art. He's an expert on the famous artist Maynard Dixon, professional photographer. He's the host of the Art Dealer Diaries Podcast. He's the author of the Charles Bloom Murder Mystery Series. I don't know how you have time to talk to us today, but we're glad you're here.
Well, it gets me out of work. It's a good deal.
Yeah, that's kind of our strategy too. So.
Yeah, it's like, leave me alone. I'm doing a podcast. Can't be bothered. Thank you.
Well, Mark, we're sitting here curious before the broadcast, and we want to know what prompted you to change careers from a physician to a artist, owner of an art gallery, photographer, everything you do now. What did you get tired of medicine, or just?
No, I never got tired of medicine. It was just that when I would look at the stack of books next to my bed, it went from being a stack of New England journals to a stack of books about Native American art or Western art, and I realized, okay, there's something here that's going on, and I got offered a job, which kind of was my goal job, working with a professional team in Phoenix, and I realized if I took that job, then I was going to be go with that group, I'd be doing that forever. So I just said, no, I think I'm going to do this, at least give it a shot. So I figured I'd do 3 years, and if I could make a living after 3 years, I think I'd, go down that road. And luckily I was able to do that.
Well, that's terrific. At the ranch here, we're kind of proud that my great uncle was Alan Tupper True, and we've got a bunch of reproductions of his through his easel art through the and mural studies through the dining rooms, and then of course all the rooms here have Diana Medeiros, who's a contemporary artist and prominent in Tucson, and then we've got some Russell and Remington replica bronzes around. So we really appreciate art. And I think it was, we had to work a long time to where we could get to where we could enjoy it and have it. I'm interested. The Native American art is a part that I don't know much about. How did that grab you initially?
Well, I grew up in New Mexico, and so I was always interested. You're surrounded by it in New Mexico. And my dad grew up on a farm in Arkansas and had collected arrowheads his whole life and axe heads and things like that. And so I'd play with those as a kid, and then started going up to Santa Fe, and I bought my first little pottery piece when I was about 8 years old, and I still have that. And it just grabbed me. I liked it. I just really enjoyed it, and enjoyed the culture and everything about it. So I became interested in, as a collector. I was really just a collector, and I found that I could take the things I bought and upgrade, sell them, get more, and then pretty soon I realized, I'm pretty good at this. I could probably even do it as a profession, or just build my collection up really great, and I'll have a great collection if I just do it. So I just kind of fell into the finding out that I had the abilities to do that. And I always tell people that, they say, well, how can you become such an expert in all these fields? And I just say, I became a doctor in 4 years. So there's a lot to learn there. And I just attacked it like I did medicine, and just read everything I could and looked at it as all I could. And if I had had the internet back then, I would have been able to do it half the time, I think, quite frankly.
I'll be darned. Well, your specialty? Let's talk about Maynard Dixon. What got your interest in him?
Yeah, well, so Dixon moved to Tucson, lived here the last part of his life from 1940 to 1946, and he'd come here and did the train depot in 1907, and also was here in 1900. So he knew Tucson, he liked Tucson, and somebody brought me in a painting that I just fell in love with, and it was love at first sight, and I started doing research to find out, what's the scoop on this guy? He's so good. It was a painting called Late Light of the Catalinas, which I still have. It's in my house. And I started realizing that this guy lived in such an incredible time frame, and all the things that he did. You're talking about a guy who was born before Custer's last stand. He saw World War I, the great earthquake of April 18th of 1906, the great pandemic of 1918-19, the Great Depression of 1928, and the World War II, and finally the atomic bomb. And he lived through that entire time and was very interested in the West and captured the West at a time that was really changing dramatically, not only from the landscape aspect, but also from the people aspect. So he visited probably 25 tribes, Native American tribes, over his life. He also spent, months and months and months living out with like the Hopi and the Navajos and the Apaches. So he really got a sense of who the people were, and he didn't try to sugarcoat things and, make them look like something they weren't. He captured them as individuals, as people. And, that ability, along with his innate sense of composition, color, and drawing skills, just set him aside as this great person. And he knew everybody. He knew Charlie Russell. He met, Buffalo Bill. He knew Remington. He knew just Henry. I mean, you name it, he knew it. And he was married to Dorothea Lange, one of the greatest 20th century photographers. And so he's got this complex story that also intertwines with what I'm interested in, which is the West and the desert, which I grew up in. And, I just said, yeah, this is the one. So there you have it.
Would it be true to say that if you saw 20 of his paintings that you would get a glimpse of the whole West, or did he specialize more in one thing than another?
So I could take 20 paintings that would show you the whole West. Yeah, I mean, he painted Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, a little bit of Texas, a little bit of Colorado.
Wow.
Oregon. He got pretty much everything. And then he was an illustrator as well in New York City. So he was there from 1907 until 1912 and painted that region as well. But yes, he knew the West, saw the West, understood the West, knew the people, and and again lived in this time frame before there was electricity to the nuclear weapons. So I mean, he saw everything, and he was part of helping build the Golden Gate Bridge with his. He got the illustrations to do that, as well as Boulder Dam in 1934. So he was involved in two of the most major projects of the West of the United States, not just the West, the United States, in the first quarter and half of the 20th century. So this is a guy who knew everybody, was involved in major events, and had the skill set. So yes, to answer your question, yes, he could, through 20 paintings, I could show you the West.
That's a great answer.
That's incredible. So, and your museum is kind of the Maynard Dixon Center. Would you call it that?
Well, it's called the Maynard Dixon Museum. That's what it is. We have his easel. We have a bunch of his ephemera. We have his poetry. We have 150 pieces of original artwork. We have all his books he wrote. So it's a kind of an exhaustive look at the guy's life. If you come here, it's a little gym. It doesn't cost you anything. It's free. It's open during the gallery hours, and so people that are interested in Maynard, as well as Dorothea Lange and his third wife Edith Hamlin, we have her paintings as well. It's a nice way to just be able to come, look, and see his life in a snapshot. So we have people who come from all over just to see this museum, which is interesting. There's a great interest in Maynard Dixon and, of course, his Dorothea Lange and Edith Hamlin. And, it's right here in Tucson.
Mark, am I remembering this right? Didn't True West call him the artist who might be the West's most important? Is that the West's most important artist?
Yeah, that
sounds
like something that they would have said. Bob Bosbell put him on the cover of their magazine. I think they used Earth Knower, a 1931 painting, and that was during a couple of years ago. They had a big show that I helped co-curate at the Scottsdale Museum of the West, and they put him on the cover. So yeah, he's important. He's a very important Western artist. He's a very important artist. A lot of people will call him the Hopper of the West, and and he would have known Hopper as well when he was in New York. So, and Bellows and Robert Henry and Blackens and all those people. He knew them all.
So I think you said he was in Tucson at the end of his life, 40 to 46. Did
Correct.
I remember? And
yeah.
What was he doing here? Was he still producing art and any interesting Tucson tidbits?
Well, I'll give you this. I don't know if you'll like it or not, but I'll give it to you. Because he was part of the things that he did a series called Ranch Life Series, where he went out, and I think it was Tanque Verde Guest Ranch is where he did, and he drew all these watercolors of humorous East Coast people trying to get on horses, that kind of thing.
That's always humorous.
Because here's a man who, with Edward Breen, in May of 1901, took 6 horses and went 1,000 miles on horseback.
Wow.
So he knew the back end of a horse. He also took horses to Mexico with Martinez. And so, when he saw the changes of the West from real cowboys that he had known and people that he had spent time with that were old timers, and then he comes to Tucson, which really has, I think, one of the reasons he came to Tucson, because it had the sense of not being destroyed, of really still having the sense of the West. And then he sees, these cowboys having to deal with some of these Eastern guys, and not all Eastern, but city slickers, basically. I think that and some of the movies that he saw really kind of, he wasn't, he showed it through his art. And it's funny, those images, which we have 2 of those ranch life images, are highly sought after and people really love them.
The ones that might have been done at Tanque Verde?
Yeah, I think they were done at Tanque Verde. Yeah, but I don't know that for a fact.
Yeah, because I'm obviously really intrigued. That would have been just before the Cope family bought Tanque Verde, and Tanque Verde's pretty interesting. There's only 3 families that have ever owned it. The Carrillos, who homesteaded, Jim Converse, who would have been 40 to 46, and then the Coates in 48. But I've never heard them talk about the Maynard Dixon connection, and it would be one that I would sure be bragging about if it was here. So,
well, we could just say it's yours.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and invent that.
Well, and of course in the 40s there were over 100 dude ranches in Tucson.
Yeah,
so, but Tanque Verde would have been a good one. So,
somewhere in my mind I put that as that's the one that they used, but I don't know if I can document it for sure. But I have the paintings, and he liked them so much. Actually, Dixon enjoyed them and liked doing them, even though they were kind of different from what he was known for, that he was going to do a group of them and have them in, I think it was the Saturday Evening Post, as he was going to do a whole story on the dude ranches and, and the life of the changing life of the cowboy. But they were so successful, he just kept selling them before he'd had enough to actually do the article. So it never
Tough
got
life,
done.
huh? Yeah. Hey, I'm going to break in here in just a second right now, and we're going to take a little break, and we'll be right back.
The Cowboy Up Podcast would like to thank Western Writers of America for sponsoring this portion of the program. Western Writers has been around for over 60 years, and they have talented and passionate authors and writers, script writers, you name it, they have it in the genre. And they all focus on one thing, and that's the American West, both past, present, and future.
And we also like to thank another fine sponsor. That is someone who also focuses on keeping the Western tradition, the cowboy ethos, the way of life alive here in the West, and it is the Dude Ranches of America. They have an experience just for you and your family, and a number of people are discovering that's what they need to do. And so the bookings are going well, and we are inviting you to make sure that the Dude Ranch experience is something that you and your family will enjoy through the holiday time and well into the springtime that's coming. So why don't you do that right now? It's time to book up so that you can saddle up at one of the many fine ranches that are a part of the Dude Ranches of America. DudeRanch.org, DudeRanch.org. And thank you.
So, Mark, we were talking about your art, but you're far broader than that. Let's talk about your books, especially the Charles Bloom books.
Yeah. So this is a murder mystery series that I've written. I've written 8 books in the series, and then I've written one other novel that's a murder mystery. But basically, it's the protagonist is an art dealer. So write what you know, and that's what I did. He's set up in Santa Fe. He falls in love with a Navajo girl, and it's that relationship, the cultural relationship that they have to deal with, for one thing, because there are those things. And having grown up in New Mexico and having lots of Native friends, and I've been exposed to these kind of relationships. And I have a buddy who owns a trading post, which is the Totalina Trading Post in New Mexico, next to the Two Great Hills area, and I spent a lot of time out at his trading post. I'll give a shout out to him, Mark Winter. And it's a great trading post, by the way. I encourage people to go see it. And it just kind of came to me when I was out there spending time watching a real, a trading post that still is functioning, with people coming and a center of activity. And I just thought, I can write one of these. And I thought I'd try it, and I did, and it turned out to be fairly successful. And so it's a series that just, kind of follows their lives through the eyes of an art dealer. So even though it's a murder mystery, it has to go through there has to be art involved in there. I always try to put things that are historically factual, as well as try to educate a little bit about the art world and things, different types of art. So it's kind of an interesting blend. It's not just the murder mysteries, though those are clearly the key component, but there's also this aspect of, giving you a little education and kind of pulling back the screen of the art Oz so you can see what the world can and sometimes is.
Well, I'm jealous of you that you could spit out those books along with everything else you do in your life, and apparently just spit them out with ease. So good on you.
Yeah, I don't know about the ease part, but I do spit them out.
All right, any more coming in the Bloom series?
Yeah, there'll be at least one more that I'm working on. I just, I know the premise. I know what I want to do. I just have to find the time. We've had the pandemic, of course, got in the way of a lot of things. And then I did this big Dixon book, too, which is a nonfiction book that I did for the museum show that took 3 years to do. So that kind of was a time waste, not time waste. Well, it felt like it at times, but at times sucked for sure. And now I've just been putting a little more effort into my podcast, like you guys. I do my podcast once a week, so that's taken some energy as well.
Well, I want to come back to the podcast because I know a lot of our listeners will want to tune in with yours, but I wanted to kind of circle back to the history of the Southwestern art. Lynn does some great research for us, specifically the role the Santa Fe Company and, of course, the Fred Harvey Company played. I understand they had a big role in getting that going, really.
Well, you even have to take a step back from there, and you go to, at least on the Navajo Nation and the Hopi Reservation, you have things like Lorenzo Hubbell, who comes into the Navajo Nation in 1878 and sets up the first trading posts. And then over the next 25 years, you have trading posts just explode, just kind of like the Dude Ranches probably were doing similarly, maybe a little later, but they explode throughout the reservation, not only in Navajo, but also up in the Hopi and Keams Canyon area. And then you have the railroad coming in, and right about that same time, 1879, 1880, through New Mexico, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, and all that. And so once you have the railroad, you have people like Fred Harvey setting up his hotels along the railroad and selling, Native American art as well as, food and everything else. So you have this expansion of the West. So places like Cayente, which was the most isolated city in North America, you could get close to getting to. And then you start having the Westerns really play out, which brings more interest. People really are interested in finding out, what this is all about. And so there's this great interest in America at that time. In fact, you would see what they'd call them Indian rooms, where people would buy and collect Native American material, and they'd have one room in their house, whether it's on the East Coast, West Coast, or in the Southwest, that was just all Native American stuff, baskets and rugs and the likes. So there was a great interest in Native arts, still is, of course, but it really expanded at that time. And the West, again, the Old West wasn't that far removed. The cattle trails of the 1870s wasn't that long ago. And so it was through the people like Fred Harvey and the trading posts like the Hubbell Trading Post, which is still open as a National Historic Site now. Those really changed the way I think Native arts were looked at and collected, and a lot of the things that Native Americans had been making for themselves changed to things that they could make and sell. And you have silversmithing coming in the Navajo and the Hopi, the Zuni, that really, took an important component. And rugs became, instead of blankets, they started to make rugs because people didn't need blankets because they could buy blankets. And so it changed their arts and crafts and the things that they were doing as well. So, yeah, it's history put influences on all the native tribes, and of course still does.
When did they make that? So did you say Hubbell was 1888?
1878.
1878. Okay. So when did the silversmithing and the blanket making, when did that really take off as a result?
Silversmithing came in about the 1870s, really, and it was learned from, the Hispanic culture. It was they say the Navajos were the first to learn, but it was the Navajo and the Zuni were very close in that time frame. So right in that 1870s time frame is when you really start to see that develop. And of course, that was a natural progression to be able to put those and sell that at trading posts. Blankets, on the other hand, have been made for hundreds of years, and so they had been making blankets for sale and trade. The Navajos to other tribes. The Navajo blanket in the early 1800s, mid 1800s, was an extremely valuable commodity. It was worth 10 horses, and it might take a year to make and could be waterproof. And it was the most expensive item of clothing in the New World was the Navajo blanket. If you can imagine one blanket worth 10 horses. And so they made, those were being made from, the Navajos came down there, Athabascan, and got into the Southwest somewhere in the 1350, 1400s. And, they, of course, will tell the heritage of Spider Woman, teaching them how to weave. And, with the wool coming in from conquistadors, the Spanish, wool, the sheep escaped. So they were able to make blankets instead of cotton to use wool. So they became the masters and still are. One of the great weavers of the world are Navajo weavers. And so those changed when the railroads came and the trading posts came and all that, because they just didn't need blankets. People didn't want to trade 10 horses for a blanket, but they would pay a good sum of money for a nice Navajo rug that you could put on the ground. And those started coming in around the turn of the century for rugs.
Okay. So am I remembering right? Louisa Wetherill ended up in the dude ranch business at a ranch that we now have, Rancho de la Osa, on the border near Sassabee. Was she in? They were trading in Kayenta, one of their places. Yeah. Is that?
Yeah, they were up in Chinle and up in the Wetheralls. Yeah, and Dixon knew Wetherall, by the way.
Oh yeah.
John Wetherall and Louisa. And I actually wrote one of my murder mysteries was set up at the Wetherall trading post up there, and in fact they're buried. I think they're both buried in Kayenta, and the grave marker was done by Harry Dixon, who was a metalsmith, who was Maynard Dixon's brother. But yeah, she was very much involved in that kind of stuff. Yeah, she was an interesting person.
You make it sound like it was a small community back then and everybody related to everybody.
I think it was in a little bit of a way. You had to depend on your neighbors and you had to know who was who. And I think that's true. And the artist community was definitely like that. When Dixon goes in 1922 up to Kayenta and he spends time with Wetherall, other artists are coming up too to visit. They're all kind of coming up and having a get together and seeing the area. And again, 22 is a very, it's still not a lot going on. I mean, 1922, you had things like women were just being allowed to wear makeup, and women just had gotten the right to vote. And you had, in 1922, you had the great hat riot in New York City, where I think 5 people were killed because they were wearing straw hats almost past Labor Day. So, I mean, you have to think about.
Sounds like modern times to me.
Yeah, right. So you have to think about how different it was. And in 21, you have the riots in Tulsa, the massacre in Tulsa as well. It was a different time for sure. I think we have to put things in context to understand. History tells us what kind of the effects are. And, so Dixon's, up in Kayenta in 22 when all this is going on, and he's spending months and months and months, just painting the Navajos, the Hopis, Canyon de Chelly. Dorothea's up there taking photographs. So they were very important individuals in capturing the art and being influential in Arizona history, Western history, but specifically Arizona history too.
Well, let's jump on another horse for a minute because don't have a lot of time. Talk a little bit about your podcast, please.
So I decided to do this quite a few years ago. Well, what I wanted to do is I wanted to capture the voices of traders, Indian traders, really. That was the basis of kind of what I wanted to do probably 10 years ago, because I just felt like they were all dying off and I wanted to get some of that. And then podcasts really came in, and I thought, well, I don't have to go video and do all this. I can just set up a podcast and do it. And I decided it would just be, it's called the Art Dealer Diaries. And basically it's what comes through my eyes, what I see, and what I, the individuals that come through as an art dealer and as a person who likes to collect art. So it's art dealers, it's artists, it's Western writers, it's photographers, it's art critics, it's, anything, historians. It has to do with, what kind of comes through my world. So there's a lot of Native American artists, there's, Western dealers and writers, and just, it's kind of the whole gamut. It really, in a lot of ways, is part of what your base would like to hear, because it's kind of in that there are individuals that are very interesting that we capture. So if they come through my purview and it seems like something that I would find interesting, then I do these long formats. So ours go, I can go 3 hours.
Wow.
As you can tell by this podcast.
No, it's been great. So we should wrap it up with that. That is, I'm trying to, Art Dealer Diaries, and that's the podcast. And I assume it's out in all the places that podcasts are found.
You can get it on Spotify, you can get it on Audible, you can get it on YouTube. All mine are video too, so people can actually watch and see the individuals. And I think that adds a dimension that when you get to look at somebody's face and see how they react. And I've been doing it for almost 4 years now, so I think I've got 175 episodes.
We can learn from the master.
I don't know if I'm the master, but you can learn some of the things probably you don't want to do.
That's extinction.
Well, Mark, for the few that don't know where it is, tell us where Medicine Man Gallery is in your hours.
Yeah, so thank you for asking. So, and also my website, which I'll just say medicinemangallery.com, because quite frankly, I've put as much time into that as anything. So I have 10,000 objects on there. But the gallery itself is located up on Kolb and Sunrise, so up close to Sabino Canyon. Our hours are Monday through Saturday, 10 to 5. And we've been here for 30 years, so it's hard to believe. But this coming up next year is our 30th anniversary.
Well, I'll be there browsing soon.
Good. You come look at the images in the Maynard Dixon Museum of the Dude Ranch scenes. You'll find them quite humorous.
Yeah, I got to get there and see that. Well, thank you. Super interesting. We really appreciate it very much, Mark.
Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. And, what we all do in this, what you're doing is just what I'm doing. We're promoting the West and what we see, and I think it's important to capture these stories so people realize there's another world besides just the one we see on TV.
Are you personally in the gallery on a lot of days? Can I meet you in person if I go?
Oh, yeah. I seem to be here every day.
Okay, good. That's important.
Yep, it is. I understand. Well, very good. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and I look forward to listening to it. And I'll make sure we promote it so people find out about you guys.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, they did it again. That's right. Thank you, Russell. Thank you, Alan. Thank you for all of you who have been involved in the Cowboy Up podcast. And as the producer and as the director of the Cowboy Spirit USA, we want to thank you for making all of this possible. And we want to remind you, speaking of rounding things up, we should talk a little bit about the roundup. A real roundup is just finishing up at the Tombstone Ranch, and it was a lot of fun. You see, as it is a real roundup, branding and a cattle drive, and all in 1 week. So, you know what? we're still doing that, and you can still experience it. So let's just let you know that it is time to start booking up for one of those adventures, and look for the spring cattle drive dates, which will be posted soon. What a wonderful time to, hey, do something new, something different, something challenging, and something that will be a lifelong experience. So, White Stallion, the weather is perfect to take advantage of all the outdoor activities we offer. So you do that at whitestallion.com. And then while you're there, talk about going to the Roundup at Tombstone.
Well, that was a really interesting podcast, and it made me so aware, not of just history, but how much I've missed of history, because history is everywhere, but looking at something and saying, where did that come from in history and what does it mean? I think, at least for me, I don't think those thoughts, and I should. And so I have a few pieces. My strongest piece that I do think that is that my dad and 4 cowboys all worked more than 50 years on our ranch, each one of them, and I have their spurs. And I look at those spurs, and it just comes flooding back over me about my part of that 50 years, and I think how lucky I was to be a part of that.
Well, I mean, it does come down to the objects. I listen to these great courses now and then. I've been listening to this great Indian civilizations of North America, and a lot of the North American sites were whatever you'd say, looted, I guess, and so there's a lot of missing pieces listening to the archaeologists because the artifacts are gone and they don't know where they were, and so it does come down to those pieces that tell a big story, whether they're spurs of 50 years of riding horses or a pot that they made dinner in.
Well, we all need to be aware of that more than we are, I think.
That's for sure. More people outside the ones who, it's their business to know. Everybody else needs to appreciate it too.
And that's a wrap from Arizona, where ranches are abundant and sometimes downright remote. A cowboy thanks to Stan Husted's production team. Tune in next week when the talk changes to music, specifically Western singer Greg Hager's award-winning tunes. Until then, this is Lynn Weezy Sneed reminding you to sit tall and ride safe.